Welcome to NREI's Common Area Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the award-winning editorial staff at nreionline.com. Let's jump right into this week's podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Common Area with your host, David Bodamer. David has brought on a fantastic guest today, so I'm just going to hand everything over to him. David, go for it.
So today we've brought on Chris Caton, who is the Senior Vice President of Global Strategy and Analytics at Prologis. Hi, Chris.
Hi, David. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Here, I remain hunkered down in Brooklyn, New York, and I think going on day 90-something of remote work, and it looks like we're going to be, we just actually got confirmation that we're going to stay remote at least till September. So it's kind of interesting here. I think you're based out in California, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm in Oakland, California, so kind of the analogous to Brooklyn. I'm in San Francisco's Brooklyn and Oakland, California.
So I was wondering if you could just start real quick, just like telling us what your role is with Prologis. I think a lot of the listeners are familiar with the company, but just about your role and then some of this research that just maybe a quick overview of some of the research that you guys have been putting together. Yeah,
happy to do it, and thanks for asking. So for those who aren't familiar, Prologis is the world's largest owner, operator, developer of logistics real estate. We have nearly 1 billion square feet globally. That's roughly 125 billion in assets under management, spread across more than 4,000 buildings and more than 5,000 customers. We're on 4 continents, 19 countries, the largest of which is the United States. We have more than 500 million square feet in the U.S. Look, I think the reason why we're talking today, I'm the global head of strategy and analytics at Prologis. And effectively, my message to you would be scale matters. We are able to analyze our data, our industry's data, to glean insights that may not be observable for the smaller or mid-sized type companies. We have the scale where we can really start to see the forest for the trees.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is interesting and curious about is, as you mentioned, you're a global company, which includes China. So you have been exposed to this from the very beginning in terms of like where this broke out first, where they had the first shutdowns. And then now we've seen this become a global phenomenon. Now I imagine that part of the world, from everything we see, is in a different place where in terms of the cycle of all this. So what as you take a look at what that's meant for the operations and, like you were saying, what you can look at within your portfolio, what are some of the takeaways that you get from, being in that position of seeing this from the beginning, seeing what it's like now, and maybe what we can expect?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. So a couple things. First is, I think we can look at the environment and feel like there are, 3 phases. The first phase would be some sort of outbreak phase where activity slows materially. In a lot of geographies, you've had lockdowns. That would be phase 1. Phase 2 would be some sort of recovery phase. And then phase 3 would be kind of the next normal, the new normal. And we're at varying points along those phases. And so what do we learn in our various phases in different geographies? What did we learn? What have we learned as we look around the world? Well, first off, phase 1 shows us that a lot of our customers are in essential industries. There was a tremendous amount of resiliency in terms of business activity across our customers. Food and beverage, consumer products, health and medical materials. These are large categories for logistics real estate, and they became actually more active, not less active. And when we totaled it up, we think a little bit more than 70% of customer industries have either been flat or grown in this environment, notwithstanding that we're in a recession, which means in aggregate business is shrinking in a broader economic sense. So that'd be one key takeaway during the outbreak phase. Now, it seems to me, and I certainly hope, we've kind of put the outbreak and the worsening phase behind us, and we're weeks, if not months, into a recovery and a rebuilding. And I think the key takeaway is that things will take time. It's not a V-shaped style recovery, but activity remains pretty good. So those would be a couple of the high-level takeaways. I think 2 business updates would be, One, in aggregate, we've actually seen more proposals being written and customers looking for space versus not, which I think is surprising and consistent with what I'm sharing. And then the second is customers are staying in their space. Retention rates are holding in, and so there hasn't been an evaporation of customer activity.
And so for like the activity and for the customers that are looking for space, how has their business been affected by like a shift of where you've got people with so many people working at home? How does that affect the logistics chain where things, rather than being routed to like areas where everyone's working and or spending half their time in an office and half their time at home, to like now a situation where people are spending at least chunks of people are spending large percentage of their times at home, and therefore their business needs and all of their food needs and everything are now in one location rather than diversified. So how does that affect your customers and just the logistics chain?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to approach this. The first would just be which are the industries that are growing versus shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
And let's tease that out a bit more. I said 70% were kind of outperforming the average, which is a real positive and buttresses activity. But in the details there, first off, you got to talk about e-commerce. You can't talk about logistics real estate without talking about e-commerce. Especially during the outbreak phase, looking back in March and April, we saw a jump in e-commerce activity on a month-to-month basis. Some of our busiest months with e-commerce was back in March and April. So that's definitely one of the trends. And then two is we certainly saw resiliency among those essential industries. So again, it's the food and beverage industries, it's the healthcare industries, consumer products, also actually the kind of building material type companies, construction company type industries were also active. And then naturally, as you'd expect, a couple of categories challenged. We have particularly in Orlando and to a lesser extent Las Vegas, some customers in the event space or the restaurant space that are less active or particularly challenged. The other angle I take on this, which you're also asking, is the places people spend their times have changed. And in particular, I think we're seeing some kind of deurbanization trend. And so something we've been talking about lately is, well, to what degree does a potential short-term or long-term move in urbanization have implications for supply chains?
Mm-hmm.
And my answer to that is, first off, I don't have a strong view as to whether this is just a couple month or a year-long phenomena. But for logistics real estate, I'm not sure I need to have a strong view. So let's take the greater New York area where you're based. It's roughly a 25 million person metroplex, where Manhattan is probably, call it 2.5 million people. And so a complete shocking amount of deurbanization might be 200,000, 300,000 people, maybe a bit more. That is a drop in the bucket of the overall greater New York metroplex. And I think if you were to ask our customers, how is your go-to-market strategy? How is your supply chain changing based on where a couple 100,000 people live in the broader 25 million? I don't think the answer would be in any way different. Because really what we're talking about is three location strategies for consumers: urban, suburban, and rural. And the urban to suburban transition that we're talking about here really doesn't have too material an impact on logistics real estate location strategy. If in fact we're talking about rural, and I don't think we are, then we can have a different conversation. But no, I don't think there's much change whatsoever in terms of location strategy.
Because it's still because it's just people moving around within a broader MSA as opposed to vacating the MSA.
Yeah, that's right. But also the importance, our business was never so precise as to matter to a single block or a single street. You're dealing with drive times that are in the, location strategies today are as precise as maybe 30-minute drive times. And in a lot of cases, much longer than that, an hour or more. A debate, for example, is, gosh, should I live in urban San Francisco versus suburban San Francisco, right? And there's quite a bit of San Francisco that's suburban. Or should I live in San Francisco versus Oakland? That's about a 5-mile move. Or should I live in San Francisco versus, say, San Rafael? That's about a 10, 15-mile move. Just not significant enough to make a material difference in the location strategies.
So is it fair to say then that we're not really then talking about not really looking at something that would cause massive shifts in the logistics chain in terms of like certain markets benefiting or suffering because of like people repositioning, like the overall logistics chain in the US, like what the key markets that are the key logistics markets should stay the same.
Yeah, so I think there are four trends playing out that we're talking about. Some will matter, some won't. So we've just been discussing deurbanization, and I think it's totally debatable if it's a sustainable trend or a one-time trend where basically folks that were thinking about moving out in 2022 or 2021, and they've just fast forwarded that demand to this year. I don't think that makes a material impact on the markets or within markets where you want to locate. One area where I do think there's going to be a lot of change is just the step function higher in e-commerce. I'd argue we've definitely fast forwarded 3 to 5 years of e-commerce demand into the space of a couple months here, and a lot of our customers have fast forwarded their investment in either their IT, their marketing, or their supply chain, and beginning to get to their supply chain. U.S. e-commerce share is about 12%, and there aren't great numbers on it, but I could easily see that number being 15 to 20% here in the second quarter. So pretty material change there, and some of that has been concentrated in the food and beverage industry, but it's really influencing all industries. And I do think for sure that's going to change supply chains. There's going to be continued emphasis on the major markets and emphasis in infill locations to accelerate that speed to consumers. So that's a trend we're seeing. The third category is inventory levels, and the supply chain strategy is pivoting from just in time to just in case, which is to say they're tuning their supply chains from efficiency to resiliency. And that'll generate demand all across supply chains. I don't really have a strong view as to the location strategy impacts there, but I think supply chains will need to get bigger as a result of that pivot from efficient to resilient. And then the fourth debate that folks are having is, as I think you may be alluding to, or maybe you didn't intend to, is you're starting to hear occasionally about, hey, if we all can work from home and be remote, why live in expensive cities and crowded cities? Why not move to more affordable locations? And I think that's also a point in time trend.
Yeah, that is kind of what I was getting at, because certainly I've heard that, but like you, at this point, it sort of just seems like anecdotal and not necessarily something that's been, that we could see in any kind of big way in numbers.
Well, I think it really relates to, why do people live in cities? Are they there for work? Maybe a little bit, but I think they're there for culture and the life experience and the quality of life it gets them. I look, for example, in San Francisco, and the many people who do kind of a reverse commute southward. So it would be easier for them to, live, 20, 30 miles to the south, or better yet, 30 miles to the southeast, where it'd be more affordable. But they choose to live in a city and work elsewhere because of all the other benefits of city living. And so, look, yeah, we've got a period of time where the benefits of city living have been put on pause, but those will all come back. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, just from like my own personal perspective, like, living in Brooklyn, it's certainly been this gigantic adjustment of, suddenly having so many of the things about New York not be available. And I mean, I haven't been even on the subway in 3 months now. So we've like just been relegated to just walking, wherever we can walk to. And then even within that, a lot of the places, whether they're open or not, are shut down. But then it's just kind of made us look more forward to when all of those things come back. It actually hasn't made us think about like, well, maybe we should, move somewhere else.
Yeah.
And just to backtrack on that third point of those four you made, this move from efficiency to resiliency, what does that actually mean? What, in terms of just in time versus just in case? Does that mean like keeping larger inventories rather than trying to just project exactly how much demand you think you're going to have for something and get it out, in and out, so that you're minimizing what you're having in stores? I mean,
You've got it exactly, David.
Okay.
You've got it exactly. So there have been multiple examples in recent history where we've seen these disruptions, and they've led to changes in supply chain strategy. A couple examples on the U.S. West Coast, the ports have, back now about 20 years and 8 years ago, the ports have closed and caused some disruption in goods flying, transiting from Asia to the broader United States. Also, about 8 years ago in Japan, the Tohoku tsunami and earthquake also caused disruption. And following all those disruptions, we've seen supply chains take a more of a resilient approach. So for a lot of the last cycle, for example, in Japan, we saw supply chains getting built out to have multimodal approach. Business continuity was a priority for businesses. In essence, David, what's really happened is all the benefits from efficiency over the last decade, in any supply chain, all the cost savings were lost through stocked outs and missed revenue opportunities and disappointed customers in the space of a few weeks. And so CEOs, CFOs are really beginning to think differently about their investment in supply chain and what it can do for them as a tool to generate revenue.
Is there a net impact then on demand for space from moving from the just in time to a just in case model?
Yeah, you asked the question earlier. Do you just kind of basically mean more inventories? And yeah, my answer would be I could easily see there being 5 to 10% more inventories carried in supply chains to allow this tuning towards resiliency. So we put a couple numbers out there in our research, which I think you're alluding to, which is we think this 5 to 10% could generate, round numbers, 400 million square feet of demand. I think it'll play out over a couple of years. It's not like this year it'll be 400 million square feet of demand. And the shift in e-commerce itself could also be about 150 million square feet of demand. Both trends will take out more than this year to play out. And for context, a normal year for demand in recent years in the industry has been 250 to 300 million square feet. And these are all U.S. numbers.
Right. And so do markets have the capacity to build out that kind of space? Or is that going to create pressures for where to build some of this capacity?
It's a good point. Yes and no. No, in the sense that we've seen throughout the last decade, kind of last cycle, our customers were really raising the quality of real estate that they wanted and increasingly preferring infill and last touch facilities, some of the most expensive real estate in our business. In that sense, those facilities are very difficult to provision, and you've seen rents rise the fastest in that category. So part of the answer is no. But part of the answer is yes, which is there are I think an issue of timing. Where there is room on the periphery of cities to provide new sites for development, and that's a business also Prologis is in. So I expect that to happen. I think the question would be one of timing and one of cost. The working with cities will have to work through permitting and zoning and so forth, and that often adds cost. And there'll be a new location sometimes, so you need to be thoughtful about your location strategy, and you really need to know the market in terms of breaking new submarkets.
So aside from the things that I've asked about, are there any other kind of key points or highlights from the recent experience that you think would be valuable for folks to hear?
We've asked a lot of good questions. I'm not sure I have too much new to add to it. I think you've hit on a lot of it. So the key takeaways would be, in this volatile period, we've seen that a fair amount of our customers are pretty essential to the basic functioning of daily life in cities, and that a lot of our customers have outperformed the overall economic headlines. That being said, I think in the short term, the fact that we're in a recession, and probably a pretty darn deep one, that will have an effect on the marketplace, and that'll play out over a period of time, likely this year, potentially next year. It all depends on the trajectory of the economy. And so while the timing is uncertain, I think as we transition from kind of today to the long term, these trends we've talked about, and I think what's really relevant is the transition to e-commerce and the space that requires and the quality of real estate that requires, coupled with a desire to to carry more inventories as supply chains tune for resiliency versus efficiency will generate meaningful demand and define, the next cycle and potentially cycles. So I think there's some real upside there.
And for these insights and reports that you're putting out, is just the best way for people to just go to the website? That's where I was looking at them. Or do you have other ways that you're pushing this out for people if they want to see more?
Yeah, we definitely want to make sure people can get our views. You're right. I think the best way to consistently get it is at prologis.com in the research section there. But also we're active along all the vectors of social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's LinkedIn.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you very much for, diving in. I think we covered a ton of ground. It's been very, from my perspective, from the perspective of trying to cover commercial real estate, there's just so much to try to get our heads around. And I've been very eager to kind of get some of these insights on what's happening on logistics and in the industrial sector. So I very much appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
David and Chris, this was fantastic. Chris, obviously, now I know why David brought you on. You were just rapid fire, just giving so much information. That was a lot of meat for people to digest. And I thank you for giving your website out. Can you do that one more time for me? Give the website out one more time for people to go to.
Yeah, sure. You can head to prologis.com, the research section. We've got all our research reports there.
Perfect. David, thank you so much for bringing them on. Any closing thoughts for you today?
No, just hope people are being careful about reopening and staying safe. And, we all want to get back out there, it seems like. And thank you for listening.
Absolutely. And again, thank you, audience. Thank you for tuning in to the Common Area Podcast with David Bodamer. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when David comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it really easy to share these podcasts with your colleagues. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at NREI, this is Eric Johnson inviting you back in 2 weeks for all the stories that matter to you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Common Area Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of NREI or Informa. The content has been made available for information and educational purposes only.